All right, so when I say the Middle Ages, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it knights in shining armor? Maybe huge soaring castles and epic quests? Yeah, that's definitely part of the story, but trust me, it's not even close to the whole picture. So today, let's peel back that fairy tale veneer and find out what life was really like 1,000 years ago.
See, on the one hand, you've got the fantasy we all know and love. But on the other, the reality was, well, a little less glamorous. Take wigs, for example. You might think they were just a fancy fashion statement, but for a lot of wealthy folks, they were actually a pretty clever, if kind of gross, solution for hiding a massive lice problem.
And believe me, the hygiene situation did not stop with the hair. I mean, think about it. Inside one of those magnificent medieval castles, you would not find a single bathroom, not one. And showers? Forget about it. Most people almost never bathed because there was this widespread belief that water could open up your pores and let diseases in. So, how did they deal with the smell? With really, really strong perfumes. It was a world of intense aromas, let's just say, and not many of them were good ones.
So if life for the nobility was already sounding pretty grim by our standards, what was it like for everybody else, for the vast, vast majority of people? Well, to find that out, we've got to step out of the castle and into the fields.
This number right here, this explains pretty much everything. For 9 out of every 10 people living in the Middle Ages, life had nothing to do with castles or courts. It was lived in the mud and the fields. To really get this era, you have to understand what it was like to be a peasant.
So, welcome to your typical peasant home. It was usually a single room, made of wood or just packed mud. The entire family, parents, kids, grandparents, they all lived, ate, and slept right here. And they often weren't alone. In the winter, they'd bring their animals, like the cow or the pigs, inside with them just to share body heat. And beds? Nah, you slept on a pile of straw on the dirt floor. And forget about those lavish feasts you see in the movies. The diet for most people was built around one single thing: bread. It was the fuel that kept everything going. You might also get some vegetables from your little garden, maybe a bit of cheese, or some fruit if it was in season. But meat? Oh, that was a whole other world. That was a luxury, a taste that was almost exclusively for the nobles. Your entire life was run by the sun. No electricity meant your day started the second the sun came up, and it ended as soon as it set, because candles were expensive. And public schools? Not a thing. A kid's education wasn't about learning to read or write, it was about learning how to farm, or how to spin wool, or how to work a forge. You learned to do what your parents did.
So with all that, it's pretty easy to see why this period got nicknamed the Dark Ages, right? But here's the thing, that label is just so misleading. Because in the middle of all this hardship, this was an era of absolutely incredible problem solving and brilliant, brilliant invention. So where did that name even come from? Well, it was coined way back in the 1330s by an Italian poet named Petrarch. He was looking back at the glory days of ancient Rome, at all its art and literature, and he basically saw the centuries that followed as this dark and gloomy gap in comparison. But was he right? Let's take a look.
Check this out. This is an incredible piece of medieval tech called the squirrel cage. Have you ever stood in front of one of those enormous Gothic cathedrals and just thought, how on earth did they get those huge stones all the way up there? Well, this was their secret weapon.
It was, no joke, a giant hamster wheel for people. A couple of guys would just climb inside this huge wooden wheel and start walking. That's it, just walking. And their combined steps would turn the wheel, which powered a crane that could lift these massive blocks of stone hundreds of feet into the air. It was a simple, muscle-powered machine, and it was unbelievably effective.
And the squirrel cage was really just the beginning. I mean, think about the huge problems they were solving. For the first time, mechanical clocks gave people a way to organize their day that wasn't just tied to the sun. Eyeglasses, spectacles, literally extended the careers of scholars and craftsmen by decades. And then, near the end of the period, you get Gutenberg's printing press, which just completely changed the world forever.
Okay, so you've got this wild mix of daily hardship and amazing innovation happening at the same time. How did it all hang together? How did society function? Well, it was all built on a very simple, very rigid, three-part system that everybody understood.
Society was divided into what they called the 3 orders. First, you had the clergy, those who prayed. Their job was to look after everyone's souls. Second, you had the nobility, the knights and lords. Their job was to fight and protect the kingdom. And finally, you had the peasantry, the other 90%. Their job was to work and feed everyone else. Your entire life was basically decided for you the moment you were born.
The political operating system, if you will, was something called feudalism. It was all built on land and loyalty. A king would grant a huge piece of land, called a fief, to a powerful lord. In exchange for that land, the lord promised to provide the king with knights and soldiers whenever he needed them. It was this whole pyramid of military promises, from the king at the very top all the way down.
And if feudalism was the system for the nobles, manorolism was the economic deal for the peasants. They lived and worked on the lord's land, and in exchange for his protection and a little plot to farm for themselves, they owed him a big chunk of their crops and a lot of their labor. It was a tough bargain for sure, but it offered stability in a very dangerous world.
But we have to remember, the Middle Ages wasn't just this single, static chunk of time. We're talking about 1,000 years, a whole millennium. It stretched all the way from the fall of the Roman Empire to the dawn of the Renaissance, and it was packed with constant, dramatic change.
You can really think of it in 3 acts. Act 1, the early period, was pretty chaotic. Rome had just collapsed, you had waves of Viking invasions, and new kingdoms were just starting to form. Act 2, the High Middle Ages, was a boom time. The population exploded, you had the Crusades, and this is when all those incredible cathedrals were built. And then Act 3, the Late Middle Ages, that was a time of crisis. Famine, constant war, and a plague like nothing the world had ever seen.
And of all those crises, nothing, I mean nothing, was as devastating as the Black Death. Just look at these numbers. In about 4 years, the plague killed roughly 1 out of every 3 people in Europe. Just try to imagine that. 1/3 of the entire population gone. It was an apocalypse that didn't just kill millions of people, it completely shattered the old way of life and reshaped the world.
So after 1,000 years of all this, of mud and cathedrals, of plague and incredible invention, what's the big takeaway? Why does this distant, kind of strange world still matter so much to us today?
Because so many of the absolute foundations of our modern world were laid right here, in this era. The whole idea of a university? That's a medieval invention. The maps of modern countries like France and England really started to take shape then. Core legal ideas that we still use, like trial by jury, have their roots in this period. This wasn't some dark dead end. It was the beginning of our world.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. This was a time of huge contradictions, of deep, unshakable faith right next to brutal, constant warfare, of simple, muddy living alongside mind-bogglingly complex engineering. So the question I want to leave you with is this. When you look around at our world today, what echoes of that medieval millennium do you still see shaping your life?